Hello, this is Dr. Lori. Welcome to this review of the concept of proportions. And so as part of this review, I would like to talk about the different levels of measurement that we normally have in quantitative data analysis. We've learned about dichotomous, nominal, ordinal, so that's these, dichotomous, nominal, ordinal, and scale variables. So the thing that you probably remember, and then there are also kind of these special categories where ordinal is either promoted or scale is demoted, and we have this special in-between category. For the purposes of what we're going to be talking about, we're really going to be focusing here on these truly categorical variables. So if you remember in SPSS, you can think about the different levels of measurement that they use, and they specifically have nominal, ordinal, and scale. The reason they don't include dichotomous is it's just a subcase of nominal that only has two categories. But in review, nominal, nom is name, so we're naming specific categories. Ord means that those specific categories are in order, and scale then is along a continuum or a ruler, so that it has units of measure in that sense. We are focusing then on the ordinal and nominal typically when we're talking about proportions. So if you remember the kinds of descriptive statistics that we report for these, we would report a count or a frequency and a percentage. And so that's exactly what we're doing when we're looking at proportions, is we're looking at what percentage of the whole, what proportion of the whole belongs to each one of those categories. The descriptive statistics typically for scale variables are, say, a mean and a standard deviation. And so that's measuring something very different. So usually when we're talking about these kind of proportions type questions, we're focusing in on the nominal and ordinal variables. Those are sort of like the automatic types of variables for which proportions are the best way to report each of those categories and kind of like the general size of each one. Now, if you think about it, a scale variable is not a very good type of variable to have reporting with proportions. And the reason is this. So here we have our mean and standard deviation. You kind of know that a lot of times our scale variables are normally distributed. If we were to be able to break this down into lots of significant digits, then we would have so many different categories, hundreds or thousands of categories, that saying the proportion within each category would be really very difficult. Let's say we had 100 people in a study and we took their height out to the nearest hundredth of an inch. All 100 of them might have a different height if we're measuring to that number of significant digits. And so to say that 1% of our study is in each of 100 height categories really doesn't help us form a picture of that particular variable. So it's important to think about how something like proportions is going to be used, and then we realize why we use it for certain variables such as nominal or ordinal, and why we don't use it for other variables such as scale. Now, scale variables can either be continuous, like I said, with unlimited numbers of significant digits, or we can have scale variables that are discrete. A common example of a discrete variable would be how many children are in a particular family. 0, 1, 2, 3. There's no family that has 1.7 children. You either have 1 or 2. And so in that particular case, especially for a situation where it's pretty uncommon for families to have more than, say, 5 or 6 children in the same family. We end up essentially with a scale variable. We technically can calculate a mean and a standard deviation for a population overall, but we also end up with a situation where we could theoretically, for each of those different levels of how many children do you have in your family, we could say, well, 10% of families have 0 children, 30% of families have 1 child. As soon as we have a scale variable that's discrete, that has few categories, then percentage actually might make sense for reporting. So then we have some options. We can do mean and standard deviation, or we can report frequency, which is also n. We can report n and percent. So that we saw that last quarter, where a scale variable that's discrete, that has very few categories, can behave as if it's more of a categorical type of a variable. So that would be the one exception where proportions could make sense. So that's a quick review of proportions. Thank you for joining me.